Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first of a series of webinars, attendance of which will qualify you to receive an electronic certificate of attendance of a management development program, or MDP. The focus of this particular management development program, as you would have guessed by now, is leadership. And you see before you two, what I believe are exciting speakers who I will introduce shortly. Each speaker will make a presentation, or there will be a presentation, and then there will be time for people in terms of questions. And you are required to use the Q&A function to type in your question, and then I will ensure that one of the panelists responds to that. Okay, thank you for that. And I want to thank you all for your attendance and participation here this evening. Just remember that in order to achieve the certificate of attendance for this particular program, you would have to attend on all 3 days, that is tomorrow, today, tomorrow, and on Wednesdays. Only candidates that attend on all 3 days will be awarded that electronic certificate of attendance, as Brandon has just reminded us on the chat. I can assure you that it will be worthwhile for you, that you will take something away, particularly from your attendance over the next 3 days. And today we're going to be talking about the foundational concepts of leadership, theories of leadership, and a practical application in terms of a case study. And we have two speakers, as I said, but let me just tell you a little bit about leadership, not the content itself, but if you have to do a Google search just for using the word leadership and search that in less than a second, 0.88 of a second to be precise, you will get 2,460,000,000 results. Okay, if you then put it under leadership theories, if you do a search for leadership theories, again, in less than a second, 0.56 of a second, 139 million results. So lucky for you, we have two speakers here today who will be able to tell us all about leadership, so you don't have to go through those kinds of data. So let me introduce firstly Mr. Kyle Chetty, who is an HR or human resources executive, a certified coach. He holds an honors degree in human resource management, and that's just part of all his talents, and he is really qualified to speak to you today about leadership. So I'll hand over to him with that. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you, Prof. And good evening and welcome to day one of a 3-day webinar series on the evolution of leadership in the 21st century, presented to you by REGENT Business School. We have an exciting 3 days prepared for you, and glad that you could all join us. As you know, my name is Kyle. I am an HR executive for AutoVoice. I have the privilege of sharing this platform with some of SA's top leaders in the industry. My co-presenter today, Taffy Mukeredzi, he is the CTO of Marshall's World of Sports. And in day 3, we will be joined by Sameera Ahmed, who's the founder of Pinnacle Human Capital, and Robyn Sinclair, who's the MD of TLO. They'll also be part of the panelists and assisting us with some of the Q&As towards the end of the session. So please make use of the chat functionality as well as the Q&A that you'll see on your screen during the session. We want this to be an interactive session, so you're welcome to share your comments and questions with us. As we know, 21st century leadership is really a perspective of leadership intended to really respond to the unique challenges and the opportunities of today's world. Like Prof mentioned, if you search leadership, it's 2,460,000,000 results that you get in. And it's quite broad in this spectrum, and reflective of this expanded paradigm of leadership. It really draws on integrated theories and practices from a wide range of disciplines, and really to give us knowledge to transform change in our industries. So ideally, this short learning program intends to give you an overview, really, of the theoretical framework of leadership, and we'll explore some of the transactional leadership and the pillars of transformation. We won't be able to cover everything, but we definitely will give you a high-level view, so you can walk away from the session having learned something, having to go back to your respective workplaces and implementing this. Please, once again, make sure that you are using the functionality of chat, and we'll gladly answer some of your questions later on. Our agenda for today, so we're going to do module 1, which is the introduction and foundational concept of leadership. My co-presenter Taffy is then going to take you on the theories of leadership. And then we're going to have an interactive session with you, where we're going to look at the business impact case study of Amazon, and how that has influenced the transactional leadership as we know it. So over the last decade, we've seen leadership transformation and change the way we lead our people. It has shaped a new beginning in industries, and most importantly, everything that we do is around leadership. More and more businesses, people, and organizations are actually looking for leadership skills. They're building leadership within their organization, they're poaching them from other organizations, they're buying them. So what is this leadership that everyone is looking for? We're going to launch a poll now, which you would see on your screen. If you can take some time and just answer that question quickly, just so we have an overview of who some of you are and where you are in your career and from a leadership perspective. Thank you. We see those results coming in. While we're answering that, again, as Prof mentioned, there's so many definitions of leadership. There's so many things that we can go on. We understand that leadership is a process by which a person influences others to accomplish objectives and directs the organization. And really what it's about to make it cohesive and coherent. We know that leaders carry out this process by applying their leadership attributes, such as beliefs, values, ethics, character, knowledge, skill even. And although, some of us are in a management position, we have that authority, but it's about the leadership that really gives us that power to sort of influence our team. We often hear that team, or the saying that, there's a difference between a boss and a leader. And really, leadership differs in that it makes the followers want to achieve high goals, rather than simply bossing people around. There's often this debate again, are people born leaders, or are they made leaders? And I think, what's really important to note around this is that leadership requires skills. Leadership requires knowledge, it requires attitude, and it requires drive. And to really inspire your team and the people that you work with and to motivate those around you, you must be a leader, you must know about leadership, and you must be able to do. And we'll cover that a little bit towards the end of the session, where we're going to share some of this. So anyone can Google this. So if you go into the definitions of leadership, you'll find, again, millions and millions of definitions. And what's interesting to note is that Nordhaus in 2007 defined leadership where it says it's a process whereby an individual influences a group of other individuals to achieve a common goal. And we see how leadership has transformed and evolved during this time, because funny enough, if we look at an example of the US Army, and they did a definition in 1983, which actually shows some similarity to what Nordhaus said in 2007, where it said, again, leadership is a process by which persons influences others. So we know that leadership has been around. What we want to cover today is how has it evolved? What are some of the elements of the transactional leadership? And we're also going to cover day 2 tomorrow on some of the transformational leadership that we're looking at. But I think it's important to note that what do all of these things have in common? What do we get by all of this? We know that, sort of leadership is a person who influences. It's someone that has a social influence. It's not just about power. It's not just about being a boss. Leadership really requires, how do I get something accomplished with my team? How do I motivate, coach, and guide my team? How do I steer my team and the people that I work with in the organization to really make it more cohesive and coherent? And again, we all know that you don't really need a title to be a leader. You don't need to hold a management position. And when we say all leaders can manage, but not all managers can lead. And what do we mean by this? We say that as a leader, you need to be able to balance, to know when do you lead your team and when do you need to manage certain aspects or processes within your department or team. But not all managers can lead a team. And that's why some managers don't really succeed in roles of leadership. They get frustrated. They sometimes tend to leave certain positions, and they don't want to be a leader. They just would rather prefer to manage. And we see that in many organizations. I want to talk a little bit to you about trait leadership and process leadership. And we understand this by saying that leaders carry out this process by applying the leadership knowledge and skills. And this is called the process leadership. And if you see on your screen, we see leader, follow, and in between you see interaction, which is really leadership. And this is where the saying comes that, people are made leaders. They can learn about leadership. And this is where they learn it from. They learn it from, experiences and so forth. And if we look at trait leadership, it's sort of skills and knowledge that they have. It's something that, these things can't be learned. They're either born with it or not. And it's important to understand that knowledge and skills contribute directly to process of leadership, while other attributes give leaders certain characteristics which make them unique. Let me give you another example of this. A leader might have learned skills in counseling others, but their trait will often play in a great role in determining how they actually counsel their staff. A person who has empathy will make a better counselor than a person who thinks the employees are just simply there to accomplish something. And we see that there. I see there's a comment around sound. I hope that the sound is okay. We also will be sharing some videos. So depending on your bandwidth, you might freeze a little bit, but it should come across to you. Coming back, we say that while leadership is learned, a leader's skills, can be influenced by others. And we talk about this sort of in the process leadership, where it's the interaction that actually defines them. So skills, knowledge, and attributes really make the leader, which is just one factor of leadership. So while you believe that some people may be born with leadership, and while some people think that some people can learn how to be a leader, there's different theories around this. There's different case studies and practical examples around this. But what's really important is that a leader should have the skills, knowledge, and attributes, which is really important. As leaders, we're always faced in situations with our followers, and communication plays a role in this. And what's important that as a leader, you must have an honest understanding of who you are. You must know what you know, and you must do what you can do. And also note that it's the followers, not the leader or someone else, who determines if the leader is successful. If you don't trust, or they have lack of confidence in the leader, they will be uninspired. And as a leader, to really be successful, you have to convince and motivate your followers, not just yourself, not just the people you report to, but your followers, so they know that you are worthy to be followed. And as followers, it's important to understand that different people require different styles of leadership. For example, a new hire that maybe starts in your organization will require more supervision than other, some of the experienced employees in your company. And someone that maybe lacks motivation requires a different approach than one with a higher degree of motivation. So as a leader, you really must know your people. The fundamental starting point is having a good understanding to human nature. You need to understand needs, emotions, motivation, leading with empathy. Those are important points as a leader that you need to know. And you must know your employees, know what sort of drives them, know what motivates them, know how to engage them better. And by doing that, one of the ways you can actually increase engagement and increase people to follow you would be through communication. As a leader, we know that communication is really, really, really important. Communication must be two ways. And as a leader, most of your communication is actually nonverbal. So, take yourself, look at a leader, for example. You are inspired by a leader, not by what they say, but really by what they do and their actions. And that really communicates as a leader to the people that, you're not just asking them to perform anything, but what are you willing to do? And what and how you communicate either builds or harms the relationship really between you and your followers. And it's also important to remember as a leader that every situation is different. No situation will be the same. And what you do in one situation will not necessarily work in another situation that you have. And you must use your judgment as a leader to decide what is the best course of action, and what is the leadership style that I need to use in this in this situation. Maybe you need to confront an employee who's behaving inappropriately. But sometimes, what if that confrontation is too late? Or what if you address the concern too early? Or maybe you're a bit too harsh in your conversation. So those are results that sometimes may be ineffective if, as a leader, you're not addressing the situation in the right frame. Also know that the situation generally has a great effect on the leader's action or his or her traits. And we're going to talk a little bit about traits just now. And we understand that traits have an impressive stability over a period of time. And that's why a number of leadership scholars think that the process theory of leadership is generally more accurate, because like we covered in the previous slide, the process leadership is generally what you learn from other people's behavior, you learn by your environment. And it's important to know that as a leader, when you communicate, it's not just about what you're saying, but it's about your behavior. So if you're going to want people to behave ethically as much as you're saying it, you need to behave in that way. I want to talk a little bit about the best theory of leadership. And I do know that, there's a lot of theories, of leadership and so forth. But I think, the best theory of leadership really states that there are three basic ways to explain how people really become leaders. And the first two explain the leadership development for a small number of people, while the third one is really a dominant theory. And we will explain some of these theories as well as we go along. And, some personality traits may lead people naturally into leadership roles. And we spoke a little bit about it of the trait theory, where we're saying that people are naturally born leaders. They in our organizations, we see some of those qualities come up. We see the ones that are generally outspoken. We see the ones that are able to communicate well. We see the ones that are able to influence other people. And a crisis or important event may also cause a person to rise to the occasion. Sometimes people fall into leadership positions because of the situation that they faced in. And that's when we really see, some of their leadership skills or capabilities, because sometimes many of us, only when we actually put in that situation, do we actually sometimes show some of our skills and attributes, because maybe some of us, are a bit shy. I think also, people can also choose to become leaders. People can learn leadership skills, and that's why many of us, go to school, go, to further our education. We complete leadership training seminars, a program like this of MDP as well, is something that we go to enhance our leadership skills. And that, sort of gives us that guide of how to become better leaders, and gives us that self-reflection of how we can actually move forward. I spoke a little bit, and I touched on a little bit about this earlier, where we spoke a little bit about the difference between management and leadership. And I think it's important that we understand that, while management and leadership have really a great deal in common, such as working with people, accomplishment of goals, all of those things, what we really understand as the foundation of management is to plan, lead, organize, and control. And we sort of hear that in some of the general management functions that we go through. And as we go through leadership, that leadership's main function is really to produce movement and constructive or adaptive change through processes. It's really, as a leader, it's sort of how to establish direction, creating the right vision, aligning, our people, motivating, inspiring, and coaching them. That's really important. But there is going to be some inter sort of locking between management and leadership. I always say that you can manage processes, but you lead people. I don't know how many of you have children, but think about if you have a young child, or know of a young child who's maybe 3 or 4 years old. You try and manage that child when that child wants a chocolate, or when that child is throwing a tantrum. You can't manage that situation, but what you can do is lead that situation. You can sort of influence the child. You sort of motivate that child, really try to understand what is going on. And we use that same theory in terms of the difference between management and leadership. And it's important to remember that, being in a position of leadership doesn't necessarily mean that I have to be a manager in my organization. It doesn't necessarily mean that I have to hold some sort of high senior position for people to respect me. You can be a leader, as a cleaner, as a general worker, where people are influenced by you, where you are inspiring other people. I want to talk a little bit about this, because I think it's important to understand that, although your position as a manager or supervisor is to give you, authority really to accomplish certain tasks and objectives in the organization. And if you go through your study material, there's a sort of a theoretical word which calls it assigned leadership. And what that really means is this power does not make you a leader. It simply makes you a boss. Leadership differs in that it makes the followers want to achieve high goals, rather than just simply ordering people around. And this is why, if you Google academically, you will hear they say there's assigned leadership, which is given to you by a position. And then there's emergent leadership, which is really by influencing people to do great things. And what's really important as a leader is that you are able to lead your team through this journey. And when a leader leads from the front, they show that they're not afraid of the unknown. They show their team that they are vulnerable. They show their team that they're willing to take risk and challenges. And they are leading the team by example. And as a leader, you need to be able to know when is it okay for your team to actually take the ropes and continue, where you can then take a step back from this and really coach, guide, and mentor them. Because as a leader, you've already equipped them with the skills. You've already equipped them with the knowledge and the attributes to really go forth and conquer. So it's really important as a leader, you really need to make sure that there's a time where you're going to really take a step back and allow your team to go forth, knowing that you've given them the skills to actually lead. I think it's important also, from a total leadership perspective, is we say when people are deciding if they respect you as a leader, they don't just think about your attributes. Rather, what they do is they observe what you do, and that can determine who you really are. And they use this observation, to tell, can they trust you? no one wants to trust a self-serving person, who misuses authority. They look good, they get promoted, but they're not really effective because, the employees or the people that report to them are, obeying them because they hold this position, but they don't necessarily want to follow them because they don't trust them. And we see these people in organization. They succeed in many areas because they present a good image to management, to seniors, but it's at the expense of the team. It's at the expense of the people that report to them. And good leadership is really honorable. It's about character. It's about selfless service to your organization. And if you're in your employees' eyes, your leadership is everything you do that affects the organization's objectives, as well as their being. So it's important to understand that to get a sense of direction, it is achieved by conveying a strong vision of the future. And that's what you need to do as a leader. And you do that by gaining respect. You do that by being ethical. You do that by building trust. And, there's very broad definitions of trust. But one that I like to use is where I say trust is really consistency over time. So can my team, can the people that report to me trust me? Am I being consistent with my decision making? Am I being ethical consistently for them to actually trust me? And we see here that, the two most important keys to effective leadership. So there was a study done by the Hay Group, and they found 75, key components of employee satisfaction. And I know some of you might be asking, well, why are we talking about employee satisfaction? Because remember, leadership ties into that. And it's about how you're leading your people. And the two that I found, that I'm sharing with you is one where it says trust and confidence in top leadership was the single most reliable predictor of employee satisfaction in the organization, which is really, really true. And one of the other points that was discussed was that effective communication by leadership in three critical areas was key to winning organizational trust and confidence. And what were these three? The first one was helping employees understand the company's overall business strategy, helping employees understand how they contribute to achieving key business objectives, and sharing information with employees about how the company is doing and how the employee's own division is doing, or their own department. And think about your company, think about some of the organizations that you work with. Your leadership team should be sharing what is the company's strategy, where are we headed, how are we doing, what are we achieving, what are some of the objectives, what do we need to improve on? And it's about having that sort of conversations through effective communication, which is really, really important. Because when there's barriers in communication, and many of you will understand this and know this, you actually struggle with employee satisfaction, but you actually start doubting your leadership. Because if they're not honest with you, they're not true with you, you actually start doubting them. Okay, and that's really important. So in a nutshell, what I'm really trying to say is that you need to be trustworthy, and you need to be able to communicate a vision of where the organization needs to go, where your department needs to go, where your team needs to go. Because that's really, really a fundamental key component to leadership, is actually communication. I want to talk a little bit about the 11 principles of leadership. And, we're going to share a video just now with you that also talks to this. But really, if I could spend some time with this, is as a leader, you need to know yourself and know how to seek improvement. And really, in order to sort of know yourself, you have to understand your be, your know and your do attributes. So who am I? What do I know and how do I do this? And seeking self-improvement means really continually strengthening your attributes. And we see, leaders going through various training courses, self-study, watching videos, interacting with other leaders, reading memoirs and all of those sorts of things from other great leaders, because they use some of those skills and traits for themselves. The other one is being technically sort of proficient. And as a leader, you must know your job, and you must have a sort of solid understanding of what your employees' tasks are about, because you need to lead these people. Excuse me, and you need to know sort of, how do I teach them? How do I guide them? How do I motivate them to really go through their job if you don't know how to do it? So as a leader, you should have some basic understanding of this. As a leader, you need to seek responsibility and take responsibility for your actions, which is important because you need to search for ways to guide your organization to new heights. You need to be able to say when things go wrong, and often they do go wrong sooner than later. As a leader, you should not be blaming others. You should not be blaming your team. You should really be analyzing the situation, taking corrective action, and moving on to the next challenge. We shouldn't really be dwelling in some of the failures for too long, because we then not focused on the strategic goal. We're not focused on how do we take our team forward, which is really what we need to do, and take responsibility. Because generally, everybody wants sort of a share, but when it comes down to responsibility and accountability, we like to pass that on a lot. If I had to go through this again, it talks about making sound and timely decisions. And as a leader, you need to be able to make decisions using problem solving and planning tools that you learn to be able to actually make sound decisions. And by doing that, you're actually setting an example, because you now being a good role model to your employees and to the people that you are influencing. And they must not only hear what they're expected to, but they must also see that. And Mahatma Gandhi makes a quote, and he says, we must become the change we want to see. And if we want to see a change in our team and the people we influence, we really have to then start changing ourselves. Know your people and look out for their well-being. And we talk about leading with empathy and knowing your employees, and that's really what it is about. It's about knowing your team, and do you care for them? Do you understand what's going on in their personal lives and how it actually impacts their work performance? If there's a child that's sick, for example, and the mother is single and she now needs to look over, do you understand the impact it has on their work performance? Are you a person, or a manager who says, no, I'm not interested in this, don't bring your personal problems to work, you will get the work done? Or are you a leader to say, I understand what you're going through, let me see what resources I can pull together to actually help you? And it's really also about really keeping your workers informed, communicating with them. I think we touched on this a little bit. Developing a sense of responsibility with your followers, and this really helps you to develop good character. Ensuring that the task is understood, supervised, accomplished, because that's where communication comes in. It's really about setting the expectation, building the team, building the right team. Making sure that you have the right person in the right seat with you, and really using that, with its capabilities to really move forward the organization by building that team spirit. And we're going to share a video now with you. And I would like, so depending on your bandwidth, please bear with us, but depending on your bandwidth, the video might freeze a little bit, but we will share it with you, and it will be available on the recording as well. And then we'll just have a discussion thereafter.
We'll go out my little four-bladed boop.
Skipper, look. Analysis. It looks like a small incandescent bulb, designed to indicate something out of the ordinary, like a malfunction.
I find it pretty and somewhat hypnotic.
That too, sir. Right. Rico, manual.
Problemo solved.
Sir, we may be out of fuel.
What makes you think that?
We've lost engine 1. And engine 2 is no longer on fire.
Buckle up, boys. Don't look dull. This might get hairy. Attention! This is your captain speaking. I've got good news and bad news. The good news is we'll be landing immediately. The bad news is we're crash landing. When it comes to air travel, we know you have no choice whatsoever. But thanks again for choosing Air Penguin.
I know you won't mind when I tell you.
Go on, tell me anything. Tell me what.
I broke your iPod.
What?
The buttons were so small. It made me mad.
The horror.
I'm sorry.
I'm gonna kill you,
It was an accident.
Gear down. Gently now, you just want to kiss the ground. Just a little peck, a smooch like you're kissing your sister. I said kiss it. Now just a little break. Just a touch. A little whisper.
I believe that's checkmate.
Commence emergency landing procedure. Flaps up. Deploy.
Only 2 passengers unaccounted for, Skipper.
That's a number I can live with. Good landing, boys. Who says a penguin can't fly?
You see,
And, you know, if we can share and you can make use of the chat function. But if we had to get some of the learnings of this video, it's interesting to see that, you know, even in a crash landing situation, the leader was able to take control of the situation. You know, he was open, he was honest about the problem with his teammates. You know, he sort of communicated sort of with the customers or the passengers on the plane, if you want to call it, about what's really going on. He took ownership and responsibility to make sure that, you know, the task was to land the plane safely. And he made sure that he had a backup plan for a backup plan for a backup plan. And you know, even when they landed, you know, he was sort of instructing and guiding the team because he knew at that point, you know, he needed to step in that role to start really making the team go through it. And we see that, you know, even when they landed, he says that, you know, we've only lost 2 people and he can live with that because they've accomplished what they needed to accomplish. And sometimes, you know, as a leader, you know, you see that, you know, we can learn from this video was that, you know, he didn't, you know, sort of also panic when they said the engine is failing. What he really did was he said, we understand it's failing, but how do we move forward from this? And he sort of then started giving instructions and guiding and motivating the people and really demonstrating transactional leadership skills with this, which was really, really good from what I see. And that ties into, you know, what I want to talk about next, which is really about the be, know, and do, which we've seen that little, you know, penguin sort of do in the short Madagascar clip. And we say, you know, one, you know, by being a leader, it's about your character. It's about, as a leader, it's your foundation ability to lead. It gives you the courage to do what is right, regardless of the circumstances or consequences. And part of being a leader is that you should be aware of your personal core values as well as what is your organization's values. And when we're talking about know, what we really mean here is we're talking about the knowledge and skill sets you need to be competent, not just as a leader, but in your job. What are the skill sets about dealing with people, about understanding, about you know, having two-way conversations, about knowing when to empathize and sympathize with an employee. And when we're really looking at do, what we're talking about is that leaders need to act. Leaders really need to bring everything, who they are, what they believe in, everything that they know to do to provide purpose, direction, and motivation. And you know, sort of this involves, you know, sort of 3 leadership actions which I've summarized for us, which was influencing, operating, and improving. And really awesome in its simplicity and elegance. You know, we can talk about these 3 words, but what they really do is they capture the essence of what great leadership is about. And you know, on this magnificent journey that you're on as being an aspiring leader, or some of you holding leadership positions or being interested, you know, everything, you know, you do is impacting your influence of how you live. So dare to live the extraordinary potential that has been given to you. Be relentless and passionate about your pursuit for life's purpose. And remember always the words of Washington Irving, which says, great minds have purpose and others have wishes. And with that, I would like to now hand over to my co-presenter, Taffy, who's really now going to take you on what are some of the traits of leadership, and we'll then unpack the case study a bit later. So over to you, Taffy.
If you can just come apologize, Taffy. Just if I can just come in here. Ladies and gentlemen, it's just to introduce our next speaker, who is an industrial engineer, but also has an MBA and a wealth of leadership experience. And I think his particular passion is about leading technological transformation. So we're very eager to hear from you, Taffy. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you for that, for those very kind words. Thanks to Kyle for articulating, I think, what is sometimes a very complex arena, particularly when you look at management versus leadership. It's an area that, because it interacts and there's a lot of commonality there, and I think you've articulated it very, very well. I've seen some of the comments that are coming through. So what I'm going to try and do is present the not so exciting part of our presentation. And I'm going to try and summarize 139 million views in 10 minutes. So please, but I think to start off, what I would like to put on the table is that culture, leadership, and strategy are the triumvirate that together steer the organization towards excellence. And much like any other triad, being in sync is a necessary condition for an effective working relationship. You know, there is no two-legged stool that will ever stand on two legs. It will fall over every single time. And in any leadership conversation that you will have, it is difficult to discuss that without the context of culture and how leaders have to drive the culture settings in any organization. A leader that does not align with, act on, or uphold the organization's values can encounter tensions that impact their ability to drive results. And I see a lot of us from the first poll are in leadership positions already and can relate to some of this. And poor leadership can influence and reinforce the wrong values, behaviors, and attitude. And this creates interferences that can shape a toxic culture and create discord between the organization's image and how they actually operate. So leadership theories try and unpack what makes some people excel in leadership roles. Why are some leaders successful in certain roles and not in others? And these theories seek to explain how and why certain people become leaders. The theories often focus on the characteristics of leaders, but some attempt to identify behaviors that people can adopt to improve their own leadership situations. So I think this slide here encapsulates what Kyle has already mentioned about the relationship between the leadership of organizations and leadership in organizations. And what essentially happens, leadership of organizations focuses on the human interaction with the organization in its entirety. And that's why you have people who assume power and draw power from their positions, whereas leadership within the organization involves leadership and face-to-face interaction at all levels. You can be a leader irrespective of the position you actually hold within your organization. So I've spoken about how leadership influences the culture. I just want to touch on the culture and climate within an organization and how, you know, this will then impact on the performance of the organization. So culture and climate are two distinct forces that dictate how to act within an organization. Each organization has its own distinct culture, which is a combination of its origins, past leadership, current leadership, crises that have shaped the success of the business, the events, the history, and the size. This results in rites, the routines, rituals, and the way we do things. I think that's a common term in every business that you go. This is the way we do things here. These rites impact individual behavior on what it takes to be in good standing, which is the norm, and directs the appropriate behavior for each circumstance. The climate is the feel of the organization. The individual and shared perceptions and attitudes of the organization's members. Culture is deeply rooted. It is something that is a result of long-held formal and informal systems, rules, traditions, and customs. This differs from the climate, which is more of a short-term phenomenon, and that is created by the leadership. Organizational climate is directly related to the leadership and management style of the leader, based on the values, attributes, skills, and actions, as well as priorities of the leader. On the other hand, culture represents the shared expectation. It's very abstract, the self-image of the organization, the mature values that create tradition or the way we do things. They're done differently, and the collective vision and common folklore that define the institution are a reflection of the culture. So why are we speaking about this? Because in order for an organization to exhibit the right kind of culture and the right kind of climate, it is the responsibility of leadership to actually create an organization that does that. I'm seeing the responses coming through. Right, so we've spoken about leaders and we've spoken about leadership, but what distinguishes one leader from the next? Is it a trait, which is a distinguishing feature in character and appearance, habit or portrayal? Is it the personality of that particular individual? Is it their skill? Is it their style? Or is it intelligence, which is an understanding and a quickness of understanding? And what is the most critical of this? And all of these traits are issues that have been looked at from an academic and a research perspective. And as the next slide will show, it is long-standing research that has been happening. And if you see the timelines of this, is development of early leadership theory goes way back. I mean, this has been a recurring theme of the ages. And up to the late 40s, the trait approach, which argues that leadership ability is innate. It resides in the individual and it cannot be learned. You're born with it. You know, between the 40s and the late 60s, it was more of the style approach, which looked at a leader's effectiveness and linked that to the behavior of the leader. In the 1960s to early 80s, it was the contingency approach, which was leadership depends. Effective leadership is affected by the situation. And since the early 80s going into the 90s and even up to contemporary times, the new leadership approach, which now starts proposing how leaders transform the way people feel about themselves and how they connect to their followers. And all of this now has been summarized into sort of 8 broad themes. So those 139 million views can be summarized into 8 broad themes, which are the leadership theories that I'm going to try and explain very briefly and high level. So the first one, which was put across, was the great man theory. And according to this point of view, great leaders are simply born with the necessary internal characteristics such as charisma, confidence, intelligence, social skills, and a persona that just make them natural born leaders. Great man theories assume that the capacity for leadership is inherent. Great leaders are heroic. They are mythic, destined to rise to leadership when needed. Such theories assume that people cannot really learn how to become strong leaders. And it's more of a nature rather than a nurture perspective. And you will notice that it's also about great man, because there was a point in time in our history when gender played a significant role in the perception of what made a leader. Fortunately enough, I think that has changed significantly since the Dark Ages and no longer plays that much of a role. The second theory that I want to discuss with you is the trait theory. And this assumes that people inherit certain qualities that cannot, that make them better suited to leadership. So people who are more outgoing, who are extroverts, who exhibit self-confidence and courage, are more suited to a leadership role. However, this theory kind of falls on its face because it has failed to account for individuals who have these traits, but in certain instances have failed spectacularly in leadership positions. The contingency theory assumes that no one leadership style is best suited for the situation. Leadership gurus, White and Hodgson, suggest that truly effective leadership is not just about the quality and qualities of the leaders, but striking the right balance between behaviors, needs, and the context in which situations arise. I think the video that Kyle shared earlier is a perfect example of that, where the situation was evolving and each situation called for a different plan and a different execution. The situational theory proposes that leaders choose the best course of action based upon situational variables. So what I mean by this is that if the leader is the most knowledgeable person in a group setting, you're likely to find that that person is more likely to adopt a more authoritative way of leading that group. However, the opposite is also true, that if there are other people who are more knowledgeable of a particular subject, the leader then assumes a more subtle role and lets those subject matter experts lead. The next one is the one that I like the most, because I think this is something that I believe in, that this theory argues that leaders are born and not made, and it focuses on actions and not mental qualities or internal states, and this can be learned. So I think all of us are attending, a leadership course because we believe that we can learn certain habits that are going to make us operate better in our environments. And this leads into, the participative theory, which is one that presupposes that the ideal leadership style is one that takes the input of others into account. So this one is really looking at, and again, it's contextual, because not every situation will allow you to lead in such a way. The management theory, this one focuses on the role of supervision, organization, and group performance. So these theories base leadership on a system of rewards and punishments. Managerial theories are often used in business, and we all know this, When employees are successful, they get rewarded. And when they fail, they get reprimanded or punished. And I think we'll try and show a good example of this when we get into the case study of how this actually is being put into action right now. Relationship theories are known as transformational theories, and these focus upon the connections formed between leaders and followers. Transformational leaders motivate, inspire people by connecting with them and inspiring them and getting them to see the greater good of the group and a vision. So it takes a very special type of person, and a special type of skill to be able to share that and make sure that you can lead a group of people into the future. Going on from this, these theories, is we need to also understand how they come into an organizational setting. What models do we then see from this? And the next slide is going to show you a grid, a managerial grid that allows us to place different types of leadership styles in relation to the kind of organization and the climate that we will see in the organization. So the Blake and Morton grid identifies 5 different leadership styles, right? And the grid has 2 axes. On the y-axis, there's a concern for people, and the scale is 1 to 9. On the x-axis, the scale is again 1 to 9, but it's more about its concern for completing the task. So through a series of questions about leadership styles that we see in our own organizations, we are able to map the type of leadership that we see in the organization. And once we see that, we are able to then take corrective action in order to improve the performance of the business. So there are different sectors, and there are 5 extremes that you'll find when you use the Blake and Mountain grid. So there's the impoverished management at the very bottom of the grid. There's the country club management, which, it's a very relaxed kind of atmosphere. And that's why it's a country club, the type of feel that you will get when you get into a very social setting. There's middle of the road management, and there's the team management. So you want to be playing in the sector between 5.5 and 9.9. That is sort of the ideal. I think some books go as far as that, you need to be at about 7 and a 7, for good performance. It's the exceptional performance that you will get at a 9 and a 9. There is the theory, and I saw one of these comments that came through, which asked about what do you need to have? What skills do you need to have in order for you to be able to lead? Right, and this talks to this presentation talks to the skill set that is required at a different level within the organization. So at the lower base of the pyramid, you'll find that your technical skills are probably more prevalent because you're actually working with be it machines, or it's a very functional role that you are performing. There is the human ability where you need to interact with your team members, but that's not the largest portion of your skill that you need. And there's a conceptual skill that you also need. However, as you go up within the organization, you'll start swapping out some of those skills. So at middle management, you now need to work through people. So your technical ability does not really come to the fore. It's more your skills of how you interact with people, how you communicate, how you empathize, and how you're able to find out what really drives your team and then be able to motivate them and move them in the right direction. and your conceptual skills, because all of this is happening in a business context. So it is also important for you to have those conceptual skills. At the higher end of the organization, you will find that your conceptual skills now come more to the fore, and there's less of the technical skill, because you're not actually doing the operative. So at a higher level, you need the human skill and the conceptual skills, because you're now having to drive and motivate people. And this, I think, encapsulates a lot of what is happening in organizations at the moment, where these skills, you need to be able to swap them out. If you can't, and you are promoted on the basis of very good technical skill, but you're not able to transition from that into a more human-facing and conceptual space, you might struggle in a leadership role. And this is nicely articulated when you look at the systems leadership model that we've got. And this one presupposes that at the top level, right, the leadership function is about change, and it's about the creation and elimination of organizational structure. And this feeds into what we spoke about when we were talking about culture. So you get into an organization at a very high leadership role, and you see that the culture is toxic. What are you going to do? So you need to be able to change that, and you need to have a system perspective, and you need to create that charisma within the organization that speaks to the change that you want. And you need to be able to walk the talk as well, be the change that you want to see. At the middle band, the leadership function is supplementing, piercing, and improvising the structural inadequacies. And what this means is that middle managers are tasked with a very difficult role in terms of trying to get results in a lot of cases, a not so perfect system. So they have to manage that and navigate that very complex scenario. And they may not have the outright authority to make lots of changes. So it's a subsystem, the cognitive skill that we're looking for there is a subsystem perspective. How do you manage an organization with all of those inadequacies that are happening around you? And again, you'll see that the most effective skill that you can have there is the human relation skill. Because if you can't talk to your colleagues, if you can't talk to your team members, those that follow you, and you can't talk to your leadership and try and get resources, it's going to be a very, very difficult task. And then at the lower band, what happens at this lower band is you're utilizing the existing structure that is there. Your ability to change the existing structures is minimal. And this is where you need technical knowledge. You're given a task to do, and it has to be done. And this is where you need the concern for equity in the use of rewards and sanctions, fairness. So at that lower band, that is what we need to see. What I want to actually now just go on and show you and share with you very quickly is a case study about Amazon. Now, just to contextualize this, James Bloodworth is an English journalist and writer, and he wrote a book which was published in 2018. Now, this book was called Hired, and 6 months undercover in low-wage Britain, and it was published in 2018. And this blew the lid of work practices in companies such as Amazon and Uber. What actually happened is that this writer went undercover to investigate accusations of oppressive and exploitative work practices and toxic cultures within these organizations. And what I would like you to think about while you're watching this video, it's about 7 minutes, is that the case study highlights certain leadership models and theories that we have unpacked. And I'd like to see, in terms of in the comment section, the application of some of these and what the results are. Thank you.
There's a new book out shedding light on brutal working conditions at Amazon fulfillment centers. In January, Amazon boasted that it shipped 5 billion items in 2017 through its 2-day shipping Prime membership program. That's about 158 purchases per second. Just 2 weeks later, a study found that more than 1,000 Amazon warehouse employees in Ohio were living on food stamps.
Now, in a statement, Amazon told CBS, "We support people who are not performing to the levels expected with dedicated coaching to help them improve," adding that more than 10,000 warehouse employees started in temporary roles. For his book, Hired, 6 months undercover in low-wage Britain, journalist James Bloodworth temporarily worked as a fulfillment center picker, and he described the work environment as dehumanizing, saying that employees were treated like robots.
And James Bloodworth is in London to break this down for us. Good to see you, James. Thank you.
Hi.
How did this project come about, and what was the job that you had when you worked at Amazon?
So the book generally came about because in 2016 there was, in the headlines there was a lot of good economic news about record number of people in work. It felt like at least on the surface that the country was recovering after a long recession, but behind that there was lots of different data which said a kind of different thing. So big rise in kind of precarious work, big rise in we had the longest wage freeze for something like 150 years. So I went out and thought that an interesting way to kind of get a real idea of what's going on in the economy would be to go undercover at some of Britain's biggest companies.
So let's talk a little bit about what it was like to work at this fulfillment center. You say there's a demerit point system at the warehouse. How does that work?
Yeah, so there's a point system, and each point is basically a disciplinary. So if you get 6 points, you lose your job, and you'd get points for things like if you took a day off sick. So I was ill one day, and I was given a point for that. If you took too long going to the bathroom, you would get a point for that. Or if your productivity fell below a certain level compared to your co-workers, you would get a point for that. Or if you were late, if you swiped in late when you turn up for work, all kinds of things, you get a point for this, and that was their kind of disciplinary system.
You claim that you found a bottle with urine in it at the warehouse. So does that mean that was that just a one-time thing, and does that mean that people were penalized for using the restrooms?
Yeah, so yeah, once one afternoon in the warehouse, I saw a bottle with, like an old Coke bottle with straw-coloured liquid in, smelt it, and it was very obvious very quickly what it was. And I used that kind of anecdote in the book because for me, it kind of told a story about how people were, when I was working there, were afraid to go to the toilet because they feared that they would receive a disciplinary for it. So it's this huge warehouse, the size, Amazon would boast it was the size of 10 football pitches, and to go to the toilet you'd have to go through security every time. It could sometimes take 5-10 minutes to reach the bathroom. And if you took too long, Amazon would threaten to basically give you a point. They would talk about how you're spending too much time idling is the phrase they used to use, and yeah, so people people were afraid to use the bathroom, and so you had a situation where someone had urinated in a bottle. There was a survey done very recently in the Amazon warehouses in the UK, which found that 74% of Amazon workers were worried about going to the toilet because they were worried they would get in trouble with their supervisors for it.
So I just want to read Amazon's statement specifically in regards to that assertion. They say workers have easy access to toilet facilities, which are just a short walk from where they are working. They also add that associates are allowed to use the toilet whenever needed. We do not monitor toilet breaks. But you obviously say you experienced something a little bit different than what the statement says.
Yes, I mean, in the warehouse I was working in, it was as I said, a really huge warehouse. There were 4 floors, and the 2 toilets we had access to were on the ground floor. So if you're the other side of this huge warehouse on the top floor where I was working, you can have to walk anything up to a quarter of a mile just to reach the toilet. You have to go through security, airport-style security, to get there. And this is why you have like the survey that's just been done, which says, 74% worried about going to the toilet because, technically you're allowed to go to the toilet, but if you do, I mean, when I was there, we were being kind of told that we'd receive a disciplinary if we kept on spending this much time going to the toilet.
You mentioned that a handheld device monitors workers' progress. Describe that device, and I'm just sort of curious about how a company and why a company would use like a device that sounds like what people who are on like, prison release, furloughs would use.
Yeah, I mean, it did feel a bit like that at times. So when you go into the warehouse, when you arrive at the beginning of your shift, first of all you swipe your card to show that so you get paid. And then you'd go to a desk where you everyone picks up a handheld device, you plug the battery in and you log in. And then what it does is that directs you for your entire shift, where you have to go. So as soon as you scan the first item, wherever it sent you, then a timer kind of starts. And then you have to reach your next item before the timer reaches, like an egg timer, before that runs out. And with that, then they would monitor your productivity. So someone came round to me the first week and told me that I was in the bottom 10% of productivity. Also, you'd receive messages through it. So, speed up, you need to get your productivity up. Or messages, more kind of anodyne messages such as, there's more overtime available.
This is not the first time that Amazon's practices have been criticized. Perhaps the first time we've had a journalist go undercover and actually work for the company. But do you think that Amazon is listening at all? Do you think Jeff Bezos is listening?
No, I mean, this is to me has probably been the most dispiriting experience about the whole thing, is that before I went into the warehouse in 2016, there had already been stories where people had kind of shone a light on Amazon's sickness policy, its disciplinary policy. And after that, there'd been news reports, and Amazon had denied it was still doing those things. And then when I went in 2016, I saw kind of many of the things that Amazon had said it had stopped doing by that time. And also hopefully Amazon will improve some of its working practices on the back of my book. But based on some of the statements they've put out since it came out, I'm skeptical, to be honest.
James Bloodworth, author of Hired. You didn't just work for Amazon, but you worked for several low-paying positions for 6 months. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Taffy, and thanks for going through some of the leadership traits and styles. I think it really ties very well into the discussion we're having now around Amazon and the case study of business impact. I see a lot of the comments coming through from the participants, and generally a lot of us are there. We're looking at Amazon and some of these big companies as, great cultures, and we want to work for them and so forth. But what's really interesting to know is that someone that actually went through to actually work for Amazon, undercover, was able to really find out what are some of the things that they're doing in there that really, sort of encompasses some of the discussion that we want to have around this. One of the important questions that we find from this case study is, would Amazon's demanding corporate culture really continue to lead to innovation? We understand that, they made mention, there was a study done of 158 purchases per second that was actually sort of picked up that they had to deliver from a customer service perspective. So, what that really means is that they were really pushing productivity, and he made mention of, using a handheld device that actually tracks an employee's performance and time and so forth. But I'm interested, I'm looking at some of the points that you're saying. Some people saying, productivity was the main focus, which is correct, especially in an environment, like that. Productivity is quite important, especially with customer service being there. We see a lot of the transactional leadership traits in there. We'll go through some of the other responses. I like the fact that one of you said, they use technology to monitor human productivity at real time. And this was addressed at real time. And I think a lot of organizations want to do that. They want to manage productivity and being innovative by that. Taffy, can you share your view on that?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting case, Kyle. We know Amazon, generally what we've seen from the outside is a company that is focused. It says it's customer centric. It's focused on a culture of service to its customers. So if you look at it, and if you look at what they've done, so there are two aspects. So there's the customer focus. There's also the aspect of an issue which has been topical in management space and research, which speaks to performance management. And one of the challenges of performance management revolves around completing the loop, between recognizing the performance is not working as it should and being able to feed back quickly enough for somebody to be able to address that. So if you're looking at it from that space, you can argue that there is a lot of innovation that is there. And that's how it's being used, because they've taken technology and they have used that technology to answer a few questions that a lot of businesses struggle with. The rise of Amazon has been based on actual sales and actual volumes.
Yeah.
Hasn't been based on anything else. So that aspect they've answered. The second aspect, which is how do you address productivity issues before it is too late for you to do anything? And in a lot of cases, what we see is a situation where, the information around productivity comes too late to leadership for them to be able to take any corrective action. It's already too late. You're talking about, we should have worked faster, we should have done this. Now, that demanding corporate culture, as demanding as it is, in the short term, they may be able to extract a little bit more value out of that. But I think because they're dealing with human beings, it's very difficult to see how that kind of culture and that kind of leadership, transactional management style at that level within the organization would continue to lead to innovation in the long term.
Yeah, I think you hit something important there where we actually said, talking about the people, which leads me to my next question, which is really, what is the people impact? And I see Mapule said, this won't work because the employees are working in fear instead of thinking of ways to improve the quality of work, which is, very true. And I see, comments, there's one from Nkosinati who says there's a high performance organization with no focus on employee well-being. And the staff are in fear of losing their jobs. And I mean, there's a big sort of case study on this and Amazon as an employer. But I think in Nkosinati, what you're saying is so true, because a lot of the people, like they were managed on productivity. They were managed with these handheld devices, meaning that they couldn't even go to the bathroom. If they were sick from work, they would get a demerit point. And if you read the case study in detail, they mentioned in the interview as well, that they spoke about them being temporary workers. So they only employ them for a period of 9 months, which also talks, a little bit to the next question. But, I see, Bernie van Rensburg said the biggest mistake is not viewing the employees as assets, which we see generally in the transactional sort of leadership space, where people generally treat employees as liabilities because they sort of hit the balance sheet with their payroll cost, and they need to make sure that they're getting every single sort of productivity out of them, which is there. And I mean, you know, I think Julian said the level of innovation in the warehouse as well. You know,
Kyle,
talking
Kyle, sorry to interrupt. I think we just lost you for a bit there. Just want to backtrack a little.
Sure. Is the sound better now?
Yes.
So I was actually picking up on, you know, some of the comments that came through, and we're talking about the people impact and how, you know, inhumane as some of the comments are coming through and how unproductive and so forth. And, you know, there's also various case studies from Zappos and so forth. But understand that this sort of company is driven, you know, by customer service, but the people is the one that in fact has to ensure that this is achieved. You know, I see you shaking your head, Taffy. I want to know, I'm interested to hear what you have to say around this.
Yeah, I think the impact on people is very harsh. There's no denying that, you know, and I think it's a very good example of how if we're too focused on the numbers, there's a lot of pressure on leaders. I think even the poll that we conducted has shown that as well, that there's a lot of pressure on people in leadership positions to achieve financial metrics. And I think one of the challenges that organizations will face is that more and more people will suffer from burnout. People are suffering from, you know, it's a very harsh environment. And we also have to put it in the context of you know, how long can employees keep doing that? It's a very toxic environment for somebody to be working in, and maybe that's why they only employ people for 9 months, because they know that, you know, what they're doing, you can't do it over a long period.
Yeah, I see there was a great comment that came through from Kylie Morton, which said it's good to be customer orientated. However, there needs to be a balance between driving customer service and looking after your team and the workforce. And as a leader, I feel that ensuring your workforce is engaged, enthusiastic, and motivated is a big part of having a good work environment. And I like the comment that she makes about what Amazon is doing is not sustainable or logic as employees is being abused in the sense of little balance between pushing productivity. But, you know, if you're looking at their business model and you're removing the people aspect out of it, in terms of how they manage productivity and the fact that they're getting these goods delivered, you know, to the customers on time, really talk about some of these leadership traits that we're talking about. Specifically one, I think that you mentioned, which was the managerial behavioral trait, where we spoke about, you know, we sort of drive people and we sort of make sure that, you know, they get things done, you know, generally reward people when we should, but we really, you know, sort of drive and focus on this. I think it's important, you know, now that we sort of look at some of the Q&As and spend some time with this, because I see there's some really good questions coming through. So I'm going to hand over to Prof now, who's going to lead us through this.
Thank you. Thank you, Kyle. And thank you again, Taffy, for that, those insights. Yeah, I've got a long list of questions and comments that have come through as we were talking, but perhaps I can just focus on one or two because we don't have too much time left. The first one was from Talent, who wanted to know about the skills that leaders should have, but I think you did answer that when you talked about the leaders. So we can move on. The Neo wanted to know about whether leaders need to be continuous learners. Anyone want to? Taffy?
Yeah, thank you, Prof. I think that is almost one of the foundational aspects that leaders need to have. You know, the moment you stop learning, you stop improving. And they need to continue that, because learning is fundamental to leadership, because you're understanding what is happening. If you look at the slide, when we share the slides, you need to go and look at the systems model that we put up there, which says that at a leadership level, you need to have very high conceptual skills. And those are improved by continuous learning. So I think the short answer to that is yes, very definitely. They need to continue learning.
Thank you. Mervyn talked about what happens when leaders suffer from what he called compassion fatigue. And there's a certain amount of, I suppose, compassion that leaders can display, but like they're all human as well. So, is there such a thing as compassion fatigue?
I think,
Kyle, you want to?
I think being a leader, there is a sense of sort of compassion that one needs to have. And it's sort of, we always hear about this, of leading with empathy and know when to sympathize with employees and empathize with them and really, understanding compassion. I think as a leader, it's important, if you look earlier at what we discussed as well, it's important to be able to draw that line, to be able to say, I'm able to lead my team so far. I'm able to only give them as much as I can, but at the end of the day, there's certain things that I need to manage. I need to manage certain processes. I need to manage certain outputs. I need to manage certain key objectives. And there comes a point where, as a manager and as a leader, you need to be able to make that decision to say, I can only be compassionate so much. How much can you give someone paid time off, as an example? The work still has to continue. There's still objectives to be met. So, I don't mean to be sounding as harsh in this, but I think that, there comes a fine line in terms of what we need to sort of, draw a line in terms of compassion and know when we need to stop. And I think it was one of the questions that asked, sorry, Prof, but there was a question, I think it was Justin, or I'm not sure, but there was someone that asked a question about, does your gender define the role or your leadership role? And funny enough, there was a survey done which says that women are sometimes better leaders in the workplace due to being that nurturer, being to that, generally women are those nurturers, those more compassionate ones. So we see some of these elements, but it's not specific per gender, I would say. It's just what are those attributes that you bring as a leader to the table? Because it doesn't mean that if I'm a man that I don't know how to sympathize or I don't know how to nurture my team.
Yes, absolutely. The studies indicate that women are better, given that leadership is essentially an influence process. Women might be better, relatively speaking, at influencing people without the use of punishment or reward.
Yeah.
And that is a key. A few people made mention of this. Jabulani asked about confidence and fear and how that affects a leader. I think Rudy Snell as well asked about that. Pulani wanted to know about this influence, and I think it's essentially that's what leadership is about, the influence process. A lot of people talked about leaders being good listeners. In fact, somebody said, well, that's why we have 2 ears. But again, I think you can't underplay that as a part in leading effectively. Tafi?
Yeah, that is very correct. I also just want to maybe just touch on the one that you mentioned, Prof, on confidence in a leader.
Yes.
And I think it is critical in these uncertain times that we recognize that as leaders, we also need to be kind to ourselves. There's a lot of pressure on leaders to always be right, to always get the decisions correct. And in the current environment that we're in, this new normal, nobody's experienced this before. So confidence levels are a little bit low. What I would want to say is that, as a leader, you've got to back yourself and you've got to allow yourself some leeway in order to pick a course and stick with the course, and this is where continuous learning that we were talking about and the ability to listen and hear and understand what other people are saying and doing, and take all of that in before you make your decision. So the listening aspect right now, I think, is one critical element that all leaders need to display, because you've got to take in a lot of information. There's a lot of information that's coming in at the moment, and you've got to be able to pick out what is relevant to your situation, your scenario, your people, and then be able to make a decision.
Thank you. Yeah. Somebody wanted to know about, I think it was Samuel, those theories that you talked about, Effie. Can you have a leader that embodies many of those theories? And I think we must understand that theories are just attempt to explain what leadership is about. They are just really views of individuals or groups of people in terms of trying to explain this phenomenon. And it also then gives us insights into our own leadership behavior. So that's that. But if we look at the questions on the Q&A, Sipo wanted to know about how do leaders approach contradictions in terms of the internal culture and the external environment, for example. Anybody want to?
I think, we all sort of face contradictions in sense, and it really comes down to, some of the things as leaders, and that is why, we discuss some of the attributes. And tomorrow we're actually going to touch a little bit on the transformational stuff, and we're also going to like to sort of engage with everybody on another case study. But I think, in dealing with contradictions, and like you said, the external environment, it's really what is the values of our organization. And as leaders, we need to be able, to sort of be frank about it and say, what we're doing is unethical. What we're doing is contradictory to the values and to our mission that we're sort of putting up there. And if we say we're doing certain things, then we need to hold ourselves accountable as leaders to actually say that I'm saying I'm doing this, then I should. And if we're not doing that, then, I should ask the question, are we really leaders? If we sort of, doing things differently than what we say we should be doing. And I think, it's important that, if there's contradiction in there, we need to sort of establish what is this, because, sometimes people perceive contradiction as well without, not knowing everything in there. So I think, it's twofold to understand, is there really, contradiction in what we're saying? Because sometimes as a leader, we might have a sort of a strategic approach, and we might not be able to share some of that. I think there was a question that also came up, which talks about, as a leader, how much do I really share with my team? Sorry, I think the question was, how transparent do I need to be? Which I think is also, ties to some of these things, because, sometimes you can't really be so transparent. There's certain information that you can give, and you need to keep certain things confidential. And as a leader, you need to be able to articulate and communicate that well. And as a team, you need to be able to receive that well.
Well, just following on that, there was somebody who asked a question about transparency. Should leaders be transparent? Sipe Specisle, who said, what about transparency? How transparent should leaders be?
Short answer, very.
Yeah. Fair enough. But I mean, is there, again, like the compassion thing, is there a limit to how transparent you can be?
I think as a leader, and this is where we speak about it as understanding your people, and obviously if you're looking at it from intellectual property, say, for example, is something that should be kept within an organization, within few people, which is intellectual property. And but when it comes to issues of integrity and sort of issues that speak to the morality of an organization, I think we need to be very, very clear that you can't, you can't not have things that are transparent, because it feeds into a culture where people will then start hiding things away from you, and that leads. So it starts off as a very simple, I've taken a pen from the office and nobody's really going to, you know, think about it. And if those issues are not addressed adequately and in a transparent manner, then it becomes very difficult to reinforce good behavior and also reprimand bad behaviors, because, you know, you start clouding the lines.
Thank you. Yes, Kyle, you wanted to add anything there? Are you okay?
No, I think I agree with what Taffy says. I think, you know, transparency is important. And I think, you know, it's important that you share what you can share. And, you know, making sure that...
Jabulo asked about personality.
Sorry, Prof, I lost you there.
I think Prof froze a little bit. I think there was a question from
okay.
Jabulo.
All right, sorry, let me come. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
yes, we can.
All right. So the Jabulo wanted to know about the link, if any, between personality and leader effectiveness.
I think, you know, personality is different from leader effectiveness. I think personality generally ties into how do you become an effective leader. You know, I'm going to touch a little bit about my Gallup sort of stuff that we do, and we sort of look at the 34 strengths of a person and what makes them, you know, good at what they do. But I think, you know, in terms of this, it's your personality is your personality. It's who you are. It's what you've been influenced by. It's your skills, it's your attributes, and how do you use that as a leader? You know, if for example, you know, you're very sort of talkative and you're very, you know, outspoken and you love building relationships and you're very empathetic, and we'll use the example I think someone gave about when is compassion too much. You know, if you use that as a leader and that personality trait keeps, you know, pushing up from there, I think, you know, you need to be able to say, well, what type of leader am I based on my personality? And you need to be able to, again, as a leader, be transparent and know yourself, which what we spoke about earlier, to say, you know, I need to be able to stop what I'm doing here. I need to turn down the volume on this. I'm using a little too much compassion here. I need to start bringing it back into myself. So I think there is a link between it. I think it's important that you know how to manage that and balance that link.
Thank you. Delicia talked about, and I think this, Taffy, in response to what you're talking about culture, how do you infiltrate people, as he says, that have no leadership skills? How do you change the culture in an organization? I realize it's not a short answer type question, but do you have any perhaps quick response for Delicia?
The question was, how do you influence a company?
How do you change the culture so that there's a leadership, if you want?
There's a leadership deficit.
Yes. Yes.
I think again it's contextual. Well, if we go by the Amazon case study, the guy didn't last very long, and he didn't try to change it. That's a question that we might have to discuss, because I don't think there's a short answer. You can only influence what is, you know, within your sphere of influence, and that is the reality, you know, as much as you want. So depending on your level in the organization, it's who is close around you. And as we said, you know, there's leadership in organizations and leadership of organizations. So,
right.
Yeah, that's what I can say. If you're one of those who's within an organization, you can only influence people around you, and hopefully that culture will permeate towards the rest of the organization. As a leader, you've got to be able to articulate.
Okay, so Matula wants to know, how do you lead people who are older than you? Any thoughts on that?
It's easy. You just get them ready for retirement. No, I think, we common faced with this. And I think, that was one of the questions that also came up was, how do you lead people that are older than you? How do you sort of, work with people and give people instructions and sort of tell them, how to do their job? And I think it's important to understand that leadership is not defined by qualifications. It's not defined by sort of, how many degrees I have or my age or my position in the company, but it's really more about your position to influence. It's more about, creating that buy-in with those people that, could be, older than you. It's about, making sure that you respect them. It's about making sure that there's, certain boundaries and respect in the sense to say, I'm in my position, I'm in a leadership position, and this is why I'm here. I'm not here to sort of, bully you or think I'm better than you. It's about us working together to actually achieve something that's common for the organization that will benefit all of us. So, and I know, because I have people that are older than me that actually report to me, and sometimes, we do face this conflict because obviously, they have a set mind of doing things, and then there's a younger generation that wants to do things their way and really don't want to follow the rules. But I think, it's important that there's some synergy and there's some sort of connectedness between us to say, listen, I understand, but I'm a leader, and you don't get that respect by saying I'm in that position. It's really about influencing them and creating that buy-in and working with them from that sense.
Kangoleni asks about, is there an effective leadership style in a culturally and gender diverse work environment?
Sorry,
it might be one for you.
I think leadership, when you look at it, is, in my view, it's gender neutral. When you look at what kind of setting does leadership come to the fore, because the respect is gender neutral. All those qualities that make leaders are gender neutral. And if you are able to influence and motivate people, it should not depend on whether they're males or females. And I think maybe it's coming from a question where it might be easier to motivate males on the basis of what you believe males like, but the same also is true for the opposite sex. So I don't think there's anything that differentiates whether it's a male or female setting. And when we're also talking about diversity as well, I mean, in the world that we live in, diversity is also not just about gender. It's about race. It's about culture. It's about
ability,
orientation, sexual orientation. So
sure.
All of those things are things that, as a leader, you've got to be able to understand and know how to navigate.
So as we start rounding up, Mikhail and Francois both expressed views about how, given the challenges faced today and particularly what's happened with COVID, how do you keep motivated, or how does the current situation affect leadership as we know it? In terms of making decisions, for example, given that we entered some really new territory, we didn't really have anything to go by in terms of the situations and challenges that we faced.
I think maybe if I go first, Kyle, on this one.
Yes.
I think the first thing that I want to urge everybody in a leadership position to do in this current environment is to remember your people. Everybody is uncertain, including leaders themselves. But if you're uncertain, imagine somebody who's following you who may not have access to the same information that you have got. So the first thing that I would recommend is people staying close to their people. Check in on them, make sure that they're okay, find out what's happening. And it's not going in and promising to solve the world. Sometimes it's just a phone call that says, hey, are you okay? You know, look, I also don't know, and things are uncertain. Those are things that you will find that, you know, people start relating to and they start respecting you. And then that's the first thing. So stay close to your people. The second thing is, I think, as I mentioned earlier, that there's a lot of pressure on leaders to always get it right. Always, you know, never make a mistake. Whatever decision, you want to make sure that it's the correct decision. And I think that has been, that has changed. The lid has been blown wide open on that kind of theory because, as you said, Prof, this is unprecedented. You know, the situations that we're going into, nobody knows. So it's very difficult in that situation to apply tenets and concepts that worked in a different era, in a different phase, you know, to what is happening now. And what I would recommend, or what I have found works, is, you know, somebody touched on it and they said, listening, you know, try and get as much information as you possibly can, and separate the chaff from the wheat, essentially. And when you make a decision, you've looked at different angles. You've got to be a little bit more deliberate than before, and understand that you may get it wrong. But if you stay close to your people, you will get the information and you will be able to consult widely. And that's what I would recommend. That's what I'm doing.
So let's finish then with perhaps two issues raised, Kim and Dinesh. Kim wants to know, do we think that the new so-called Generation Z leaders will turn the leadership theories upside down?
I think definitely. I think, you know, sort of, you know, as much as, you know, there's theories there, and I used an example of, you know, a definition of leadership from the US Army in 1983 compared to a definition in 2007. You know, and how they defined it, and there was sort of certain similarities between them in talking about influence. I think, you know, as the new generation enters the workforce, and, you know, how they want to be led and how they want to be managed, you know, comes through. I think there is going to be a shift and a change in how we do things. I mean, if I had to compare, you know, of how you know, some of our parents or my father worked in his generation and his working days compared to how I'm working now, you know, it's very different. The fundamentals are still there, you know, but there's certain aspects which is different from this. So I think that, you know, as the generations enter the workforce and as we evolve, I think, you know, even with COVID hitting us, you know, we've seen a change in leadership. You know, and all of these things, you know, we always spoke about, are we ready for this, you know, 4IR and working from home and all of those things, and then it happened and we had to adapt quickly. So I think, you know, it's important for that. But I think it's also important as leaders that, you know, when we don't know, it's okay to say that we don't know. It's okay to be in that position to say, I'm not sure here. You know, let me find out, because it also gives that impact where you build credibility with your staff. So they don't feel like, you know, you're sitting on this pedestal as I'm a know-it-all, but rather someone that is really informative, who's going to find the information to come back. And it will change. The leadership narrative will change. You know, the traits might still be there, the foundation will still be there, but there will be certain things that will definitely change.
Thank you. So Tafi, I'll leave you with the last one. And Dinesh, maybe a bit tongue-in-cheek. Says, will artificial intelligence provide better leadership? So my own view and this thing is that I mean, in human interaction, our leadership is essentially a human process between people. So is there a role for artificial intelligence in this process?
I work with technology, and
that's why I asked you.
That is a topical issue. But
Yes.
I think it's so we looked at the Amazon case study, and the biggest fear is that, you know, with some of these things for Amazon maybe to get to the next stage, you know, all those tasks that are being done by people, which are measured on a timer, you know, may be replaced by, you know, by automation. But I think at the end of the day, like you say, you know, the whole leadership aspect is a human-to-human interaction. There is, it's very, very difficult to replicate that. I certainly believe that going to be a few lifetimes before we get there, but I don't think it's something to really think that we're going to have robots leading us and being able to share their vision and get us, you know, to follow them. I don't think that there is a space for artificial intelligence, but I don't think not in leadership. No, that's my own personal view.
No, I agree with that. Thank you again for both you, Taffy and Kyle, and thank you for to the other panelists, and more particularly, thank you to all the participants. From the feedback we're getting, we're going to have to really up our game tomorrow because we've set a high bar today. Thank you very much for your comments, for your positive comments. Just remember again that your attendance is required for all 3 days in order to attain the certificate of attendance, the electronic certificate of attendance. But we look forward to increased interaction tomorrow. If you have questions, my advice is to use the Q&A function rather than the chat function. But there was really great interaction today on the chat and very informative sort of insights that came through. And the interaction between the participants was quite impressive. So I want to thank everybody today. And again, we look forward to all meeting tomorrow. And we wish you well, keep safe, and see you again tomorrow at 7 o'clock, God willing. Thank you very much.